my guest is Professor Anvil Harzing. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with her. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Anvil as a person, Professor Harzing as a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. Thank you, Anvil, for joining us.
Very happy to be here, Ilgaz. It's really a great service you're providing to the IB community.
Imagine you're stranded in a village, in a pub, locals are curious about you. The question is, how do you explain your research to people who don't read your work regularly? And how do you explain the importance of your research, the impact?
If I had to explain something that I would think would resonate with the general public, I will probably refer to work I've done quite recently, last 5 years, with one of my former PhD students, Fan. She has looked in her PhD at the challenges that ethnic Chinese who have maybe grown up in the US or in Australia or in the UK or anywhere else outside China, and who are sent back as expatriates by multinational corporations headquartered in Western countries to China, because these multinational corporations think that they will do better than Western expatriates because they know the local culture and they can relate to it. But we find out that this doesn't always work like this, and they often have huge difficulties. So she's looked at how they manage their identity to make sure that they can stay true to themselves, but also benefit from the trust they might get by their ethnic similarity and possibly the knowledge of the local language. But this would still be way too complex. So I would probably summarize it in a way I've done in a 1-minute video I've recently had to do. And it's simply like the way people look from the outside doesn't necessarily reflect how they feel from the inside. So just because someone looks Chinese doesn't mean that they feel Chinese. They might identify with a completely different culture, the culture they've grown up in. And that's true for ethnicity, but it's just as true for age and gender as well. And as human beings, we often try to put people in boxes and classify someone in a particular group simply because of the way they look. But they might actually resist that classification because they might feel very different themselves. And I think this is really important, and it's really obvious, but it's something that people don't always consciously realize. And it's important for nearly everything we do in organizations, because everything depends on productive interactions. And if people feel they can't be themselves in these interactions, they're not going to be productive.
Omitted variables in IB research, not omitted, but neglected areas, things that maybe we need to go back and re-immigrate.
Yeah.
What can we say about that?
Well, I guess given that I've just given this example about ethnicity and individual level variables, you won't be surprised to hear that I'm saying, well, anything at the micro level of analysis, the individual level of analysis, because in international business, I hear a lot of people talking about firms do this, firms do that, but firms themselves don't make decisions. It's individuals who make decisions. And I think we've underestimated this in IB, and that there have, of course, been recent movements on micro foundations of strategic decision making and knowledge transfer. But I still get the impression that scholars in these fields haven't fully integrated all the knowledge that's available in the microdisciplinary area. So I think that's really one thing that needs to improve, the integration between different elements in international business, because international business is such a broad field in terms of disciplines, but we still work in silos within international business. The importance of context. Again, there have been recent movements re-emphasizing this, but I think we could still do more on this. But I feel most strongly about omitted country context, because to be honest, we talk about international business, but it has long been AB, Anglophone business, rather than international business. And even if you look at most of the people you've interviewed, they were either born or educated in the US or the UK. And that's perfectly natural because that's where the field started developing. But now there's lots of junior academics who come from a much wider range of countries. And this is really going to change international business and make it much more global. But at the moment, I think if you talk about countries, there are only 2 countries in the world that you don't have to justify in your methods section if you publish an article, and that's the US and China. For the rest of the world, you still have to explain why you're doing research in those countries. And then, if I may, a third one, and that's methods oriented. I think we could do much more and be much more creative in terms of methods in international business. And when I did my PhD, it was mostly survey research, and qualitative research was interview based. Most recently, the dominant research method seems to be archival data, third-party data. You probably remember a recent piece in JIPS where they actually looked at the methods used in the last 10 years, and it was staggering to see that I think about 2/3 was based on secondary data. So how about experiments? Lab experiments, field experiments, ethnographic studies, big data, lexicographical data, action research, or these really big multi-country primary data collection exercises, which we did have earlier, but seem to kind of gradually disappear. So I think there are some examples of studies in all of these areas, but they are hard and time consuming to do. So a lot of academics and PhD students are focusing on secondary data. And to be honest, although that might well be appropriate for some specific research questions, it is by no means appropriate for all. So I think we need to have much more variety in that as well.
About Signa, for example, if one were to come up with some data collection efforts that involves multiple countries, are you in a position to collect data, produce data? Is this what you guys are doing?
We haven't actually done any research together yet, but yes, that's certainly something that we are considering now, to start up a project where we collect data in different countries. But so far, the network has also helped academics to find collaborators in specific countries. So we have a membership spreadsheet where we all list our research interests and the countries we have worked in. So people can get to know each other before they start collaborating. And that's a problem often if you look for people to collect data in particular countries. If you work with people you don't know, it becomes really hard to build up a relationship.
Thank you. Anvil, about the IB scholarship evolution over time, what can you say about what it was like, what it is going to be like in the future?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what it will be like, but I know what I would like it to be, and I think it partly comes back to the earlier point I made about being more global. I would like IB to be much more global, to be much more diverse, to be much more inclusive, and study really not just the 1%, but the 99%. And if I look at international business, different areas, for instance, in terms of companies internationalizing, we have focused on the big multinational corporations in general, and we haven't looked at the vast diversity in terms of internationally active companies. In the field I've worked in quite a bit, expatriation, we've studied really the 1% privileged internationally mobile people, that's expatriates that have been assigned by their company to work in another country. And usually that was from developed countries to developing countries, or at least from dominant countries to smaller countries. But there are lots of other mobile people, including migrants and refugees. So in the last 5 years, IB academics have started to look at these groups as well. And I think it's high time. But also, I think in our own profession as academics, we tend to focus on the 1%. We celebrate the top 1% scholars. And of course, these interviews are a little bit of an example of this, because you interview AIB fellows, people who are very established in the field, and we can't expect you to interview the 99%, because it would take you forever. But I would like us as a community to also focus much more, not just on the 1% and idolize these academics, but focus on how we can help the other 99% academics. And by doing that, also not just focus on publishing in a very narrow set of journals, but also think about what else we can do as academics, and how we can use our research to really, sounds a bit trite, but make the world a better place, change something for other people, even if that's a small world, maybe just impact on our own students, on our own mentees, on